Why did you call me stupid? The words hung in the air like shattered glass, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. 17-year-old Ayanna Blackwater stood in the center of Westfield High's cafeteria, her dark eyes blazing with a fire that had been building for years. The entire room fell silent, forks frozen midway to mouths, conversations dying mid-sentence, because when the quiet girl finally speaks, everyone listens. Why did you call me stupid? She repeated, her voice stronger now, carrying the weight of generations. Was it because I told you that my grandmother's remedies work better than your pills? Was it because I said the earth speaks to those who listen? Or was it simply because I'm Cherokee, and that makes me less than human in your eyes? Hey everyone, before we dive into Ayanna's incredible journey that literally changed an entire school system, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a like if you've ever felt judged for who you are, and comment below where you're watching from. I see viewers from all over New York, California, Texas, even international viewers from the UK, Australia, and Brazil. Your support means everything. Chapter 1. The ordinary world. Ayanna Blackwater lived in two worlds. By day, she navigated the polished hallways of Westfield High School in suburban Oklahoma, where her long black hair and copper skin marked her as different. By night, she returned to her grandmother's small house on the edge of the Cherokee Nation, where the scent of sage and sweetgrass reminded her who she really was. Every morning, she would braid her hair in the traditional way her grandmother taught her, whispering the old prayers under her breath. "Watto Creator for this new day," she would say, the Cherokee words feeling like home on her tongue. But the moment she stepped onto the school bus, she became invisible. Not the kind of invisible that meant people didn't see her. They saw her, all right. They saw her as less than, as other, as stupid. It started in elementary school. "Why does your mom pack weird food?" they'd ask, pointing at her wild rice and venison. "Why do you talk to trees?" They'd laugh when she thanked the old oak for its shade. "Are you going to do a rain dance?" They'd mock when clouds gathered. Each comment was a tiny cut, and by high school, Ayanna was covered in invisible scars. Her grandmother, Elissy, saw the light dimming in her granddaughter's eyes. "Ayanna," she would say, her weathered hands gentle on the girl's shoulders, "you carry the blood of warriors, of storytellers, of healers who knew the secrets of the earth before the white man ever dreamed of antibiotics. Never let them make you forget who you are." But it was hard, so hard. Especially when even the teachers participated in the subtle erosion of her identity. Ms. Henderson, the AP history teacher, would skip over the trail of tears in 2 paragraphs. "It was unfortunate," she'd say, "but we need to focus on the important parts of American history." As if the forced death march of 16,000 Cherokee people was a footnote. As if Ayanna's ancestors' tears didn't water the very ground they walked on. Chapter 2. The call to adventure. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that started like any other. Ayanna sat in advanced biology, her favorite class, where she usually excelled. Mr. Peterson was lecturing about traditional medicine versus modern pharmaceuticals, his voice dripping with condescension as he discussed primitive healing practices. "Before the advent of modern medicine," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "people relied on superstition and folklore. They believed plants could heal them." He chuckled. "Can you imagine, thinking that tree bark could cure a headache?" Ayanna's hand shot up before she could stop herself. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, willow bark contains salicin, which is the precursor to aspirin. Indigenous peoples discovered this thousands of years before Bayer pharmaceuticals." The room went quiet. Mr. Peterson's face reddened. "While that may be true, Ms. Blackwater, we're discussing scientific medicine, not folk remedies." "But it is science," Ayanna pressed on, her heart pounding. "My grandmother is a traditional healer. She knows which plants can reduce fever, which ones fight infection. This knowledge has been passed down for generations through careful observation and testing. That's the scientific method." Someone snickered. Brad Thompson, star quarterback and grade-A jerk, stage whispered, "Maybe her grandma can do a rain dance to cure cancer." The class erupted in laughter. Even Mr. Peterson's lips twitched. Yana felt her face burn, but she stood her ground. Traditional Cherokee medicine has contributed to over 200 modern pharmaceuticals, she said, her voice shaking but determined. That's not superstition. That's science your industry stole and repackaged. That's enough, Ms. Blackwater, Mr. Peterson said sharply. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a less rigorous course if you can't distinguish between actual science and cultural mythology. The words hit like a physical blow. Cultural mythology. As if her entire heritage was a fairy tale. As if the knowledge that kept her people alive for thousands of years was nothing more than wishful thinking. After class, she overheard Brad talking to his friends by the lockers. God, she's so stupid. Actually defending that witch doctor crap. No wonder they're all alcoholics and live in poverty. Too stupid to join the modern world. That's when something inside Ayanna snapped. Not broke, snapped into place. Like a bone that had been dislocated finally clicking back where it belonged. She thought of her grandmother, who could identify every plant in the forest and knew their uses. Her grandmother, who had a master's degree in biochemistry but chose to practice traditional healing. Her grandmother, who spoke 5 languages and could recite the periodic table from memory. Stupid? No, they were the stupid ones. Stupid for dismissing thousands of years of knowledge. Stupid for thinking their 200-year-old country knew better than civilizations that had thrived for millennia. Stupid for not seeing the wisdom right in front of them. Chapter 3. Refusal of the call. But as quickly as the fire rose in her chest, Ayanna tamped it down. She'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. When she was 12, she'd corrected her social studies teacher about Columbus discovering America. People were already here, she'd said. My people, you can't discover a place where millions already live. The teacher had sent her to the principal's office for disrupting the class. Her mother had been called in. Ayanna needs to learn when to keep her opinions to herself, Principal Warner had said. We appreciate diversity, but not at the expense of education. Her mother, exhausted from working 2 jobs to keep them afloat after her father left, had simply nodded. I'll talk to her, she'd said. On the drive home, she'd pulled over and cried. Baby, I know it's not fair, she'd whispered. But sometimes we have to pick our battles. Sometimes surviving means staying quiet. So Ayanna had learned to bite her tongue, to swallow her words like bitter medicine, to shrink herself until she fit into the small box they'd created for her. The quiet Indian girl, the one who didn't make waves, the one who accepted that her culture was interesting but not important, colorful but not crucial. For 5 years, she'd perfected the art of invisibility. She'd learned to laugh when they made jokes about rain dances and casinos. She'd learned to stay quiet when they taught lies about history. She'd learned to pretend it didn't hurt when they called her people savage, primitive, stupid. But that Tuesday, something was different. Maybe it was the way Mr. Peterson had dismissed her grandmother's knowledge. Maybe it was Brad's cruel laughter. Maybe it was the accumulation of 1,000 tiny cuts finally bleeding too much to ignore. Whatever it was, Ayanna couldn't push the fire down this time. It burned too bright, too hot, too fierce. Chapter 4. Meeting the mentor that evening, Ayanna sat with her grandmother in the small garden behind their house. Elise was tending to her medicinal plants, her hands gentle but sure as she pruned the echinacea and checked the golden seal. Your troubled granddaughter, Elise said without looking up. She always knew. The spirit fire burns in your eyes. Ayanna told her everything, about Mr. Peterson's dismissal, about Brad's cruel words, about the years of swallowing poison until she felt like she might die from it. Elise listened in silence, her hands never stopping their work. When Ayanna finished, her grandmother stood slowly, her joints protesting after years of kneeling in gardens and forests. She walked to the old oak tree that dominated the yard, placing her palm against its bark. Come here, she said. Iana joined her, placing her hand next to her grandmother's. The bark was rough, warm from the day's sun. "What do you feel?" Elise asked. "Tree bark," Iana said, confused. "Feel deeper." Iana closed her eyes, trying to understand. Gradually she became aware of more, the slight vibration of life beneath her palm. The way the tree seemed to pulse with some ancient rhythm. The connection between her hand and the earth below, the sky above. "This tree is over 200 years old," Elise said. "It was here before Oklahoma was a state, before the Trail of Tears. It watched our people pass by, tears streaming down their faces, and it remembered. Every spring it blooms again. Every storm it stands strong. Not because it fights the wind, but because it knows how to bend without breaking." She turned to face Ayana, her dark eyes serious. "You think I don't know what they say about us? You think I didn't hear the same words when I was your age? Stupid Indian, primitive savage, backwards healer. I heard them all. How did you stand it?" Ayana whispered. "By remembering who I am, by knowing that their ignorance doesn't diminish my truth, and by understanding that sometimes, granddaughter, the wind changes direction. And when it does, the tree that seemed to be bending away from the sun is suddenly bending toward it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This was your great-great-grandmother's. She carried it on the Trail of Tears. Inside are seeds, Cherokee purple tomatoes, Trail of Tears beans, white eagle corn, our heritage literally carried in a pouch." She pressed it into Ayana's hands. "They tried to kill us, but we survived. They tried to erase our culture, but we remembered. They tried to silence our voices, but we still sing. You are not stupid, Ayana. You are the culmination of thousands of years of wisdom. And maybe it's time for you to help them remember that." Chapter 5. Crossing the threshold that night, Ayana couldn't sleep. She held the seed pouch, feeling the weight of history in her hands. By morning she had made a decision. She would no longer be silent, but she wouldn't fight with anger. She would fight with truth. She started small. In Mr. Peterson's class, when he brought up traditional medicine again, she raised her hand. "Mr. Peterson, I did some research. Did you know that 70% of modern cancer drugs come from natural sources? Many were first identified by indigenous peoples." He looked surprised but nodded for her to continue. She pulled out her notes. "Taxol from the Pacific yew tree. Indigenous peoples used it for centuries. Now it's one of our most important chemotherapy drugs. Digitalis from foxglove. Quinine from cinchona bark. Would you like me to continue?" The class was silent, but it was a different silence than before. Interested. Engaged. Even Brad was listening. "Furthermore," Yana continued, her voice growing stronger, "the Cherokee Nation has one of the most sophisticated traditional medical systems in North America. We had surgeons who could remove cataracts before European contact. We had vaccination practices using controlled exposure to mild diseases. We understood the importance of quarantine during epidemics. This isn't mythology, Mr. Peterson. This is documented history." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Well, that's very interesting, Ms. Blackwater. Perhaps you could prepare a presentation for the class." "I'd love to," Iana said. Inside, her heart was racing, but outside she was calm, like the oak tree, rooted, strong, bending but not breaking. Chapter 6. Tests, allies, and enemies. Word spread quickly. The quiet Cherokee girl was speaking up. Some students were curious, wanting to hear more. Others, like Brad and his crew, saw it as a threat to the natural order of things. "Look at Pocahontas, thinking she's smart now," Brad sneered in the hallway. "What's next? Gonna teach us smoke signals." But Ayana had allies she didn't expect. Maria Gonzalez, whose parents had immigrated from Mexico, approached her after class. "My abuela is a curandera," she whispered. "A traditional healer. I never told anyone because, well, you know." "I know," Ayana said, and they shared a look of understanding. James Chen, whose grandparents practiced traditional Chinese medicine, joined their lunch table. "My family's been made fun of for using acupuncture and herbs," he said. But my grandfather helped more people than any Western doctor I know. Even some white students began to listen. Ashley Morrison, who'd always been kind but quiet, shared that her great-grandmother was called a witch for her herbal knowledge. She wasn't even allowed to practice. They said it was dangerous superstition. But she could cure things the doctors couldn't. As Ayanna prepared her presentation, she realized she wasn't just speaking for the Cherokee. She was speaking for all the silenced wisdom, all the dismissed knowledge, all the traditional practices that had been labeled stupid by those too arrogant to listen. But not everyone was happy about the change. Some parents complained to the administration. Why is she being allowed to promote non-scientific beliefs? They demanded. This is a school, not a cultural center. Principal Warner called Ayanna to his office. Ms. Blackwater, while we appreciate cultural diversity, we need to ensure that our curriculum remains focused on accepted scientific principles. With all due respect, Principal Warner, Ayanna said, surprising herself with her calm. Accepted by whom? Western science is only one way of understanding the world, and much of it is built on knowledge taken from indigenous peoples without credit. I'm not asking you to reject modern science. I'm asking you to acknowledge that it's not the only valid form of knowledge. The principal looked uncomfortable. Be that as it may, we need to be careful not to confuse students with alternative perspectives. Is the truth an alternative perspective? Ayanna asked. Is historical fact confusing, or is it just uncomfortable? The meeting ended with no resolution, but Ayanna walked out with her head high. She was done being silent, done being small, done pretending that her heritage was less than. Chapter 7. Approach to the inmost cave. The day of the presentation arrived. Ayanna had spent weeks preparing, researching, creating slides that showed the undeniable connections between traditional Cherokee medicine and modern pharmaceuticals. She'd interviewed her grandmother, other elders, even a few sympathetic professors from the university. But as she stood outside the classroom door, her hands shook. This was it. The moment where she would either prove her point or become an even bigger target. Through the small window, she could see her classmates. Some looked curious, others skeptical. Brad was smirking, whispering to his friends, probably planning how to humiliate her. She thought of her grandmother's words. The tree that seemed to be bending away from the sun is suddenly bending toward it. She touched the seed pouch in her pocket, drawing strength from the generations who had survived so she could stand here. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Chapter 8. The ordeal. Before I begin, Ayanna said, standing at the front of the class, I want to ask you all a question. How many of you have taken aspirin? Every hand went up. Aspirin comes from willow bark, a traditional Cherokee remedy. How many of you have used aloe vera for burns? Again, most hands. Traditional medicine. Anyone here been treated for heart problems with digitalis? That's from foxglove, used by indigenous peoples for centuries. Anybody's parents take Taxol for cancer. Pacific yew tree, traditional Native American medicine. She clicked to her first slide. Today, I'm not here to tell you traditional medicine is better than modern medicine. I'm here to tell you they're often the same thing. The only difference is who gets the credit and who gets called stupid. For the next 30 minutes, Ayanna presented her research. She showed how Cherokee healers had developed surgical techniques, quarantine protocols, and vaccination methods. She demonstrated the rigorous testing and observation that went into traditional healing, the same scientific method praised in Western contexts. She talked about her grandmother, the biochemist who chose traditional healing not in spite of her scientific knowledge, but because of it. She understands the molecular structure of the compounds in these plants, Ayanna explained. She knows why they work. The only difference between her and a pharmacist is that she gathers her medicine from the forest instead of ordering it from a pharmaceutical company. Brad raised his hand, his tone mocking. So if your grandma's so smart, why aren't Cherokee people ruling the world? Why are reservations so poor? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ayanna had expected it. That's an excellent question, Brad, she said, her voice steady. Let me ask you one in return. If someone broke into your house, stole everything you owned, burned your books, outlawed your language, took your children away to beat your culture out of them, and then confined you to the worst land they could find, how rich would you be? She clicked to a new slide showing historical documents. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. The Cherokee had their own written language, newspapers, schools, and a functioning democracy. We were farmers, merchants, and intellectuals. Then we were forced from our homes at gunpoint, made to walk 1,000 miles in winter, watching our elders and children die along the way. Her voice grew stronger. Our language was outlawed, our ceremonies banned, our children stolen and put in boarding schools where they were beaten for speaking Cherokee. For 100 years, it was illegal for us to practice our own religion. And you wonder why reservations struggle with poverty. She clicked again. But despite all that, we survived. We kept our knowledge alive in secret. We whispered our language when no one was listening. We practiced our medicine in hidden places. And now, that stupid, traditional knowledge is saving lives in every hospital in America. So tell me, Brad, who's really stupid? The people who preserved this knowledge against all odds, or the ones who mock it while swallowing pills derived from it? The room was dead silent. Even Brad had no response. But then Mr. Peterson spoke up. Ms. Blackwater, while your passion is admirable, you're conflating correlation with causation. Just because some traditional remedies happen to have active ingredients doesn't validate the entire system of traditional medicine. Yana had prepared for this too. Mr. Peterson, Western medicine has a failure rate too. How many drugs have been recalled after killing people? How many surgeries go wrong? How many times has accepted medical science been completely overturned? Bloodletting, lobotomies, thalidomide, all were considered good science at the time. She pulled up another slide. Traditional Cherokee medicine has been tested over thousands of years. Each generation refined it, added to it, perfected it. That's not superstition. That's the longest clinical trial in human history. And unlike Western medicine, we consider the whole person: body, mind, spirit, community. We don't just treat symptoms, we treat causes. Are you seriously suggesting, Mr. Peterson's face was red now, that some herb woman with no medical degree knows more than trained doctors? I'm suggesting, Yana said calmly, that my grandmother, with her master's in biochemistry and her lifetime of traditional training, might know things that doctors who dismiss indigenous knowledge will never learn. I'm suggesting that arrogance and racism have blinded Western medicine to thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. And I'm suggesting that calling us stupid while profiting from our knowledge is not just wrong, it's theft. Chapter 9. Reward: seizing the sword. What happened next surprised everyone, including Yana. Sarah Williams, the quiet girl who always sat in the back, stood up. My mom has lupus, she said, her voice shaking. The doctors said there was nothing they could do except manage the symptoms. Last year, we went to a traditional healer on the Cherokee reservation. She's been in remission for 8 months. David Kim raised his hand. My grandfather had diabetes. The Western doctors wanted to amputate his foot. A traditional Korean medicine doctor saved it with herbs and acupuncture. He lived another 20 years with both feet. One by one, students began sharing stories. Traditional remedies that had worked when Western medicine failed. Grandparents who knew which plants could heal. Ancient practices that modern science was only beginning to understand. Even some of Brad's friends looked uncomfortable. Tyler Morrison actually spoke up. My dad's a doctor, he said slowly. He told me once that half of what he prescribes comes from plants that indigenous people discovered. I never really thought about it before. Mr. Peterson tried to regain control. This is all very touching, but anecdotal evidence is not scientific proof. Neither is dismissing thousands of years of documented results because they don't fit your worldview, Yana shot back. Science is supposed to be about open inquiry, not cultural supremacy. The bell rang, but nobody moved. Finally, Ashley Morrison started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Not everyone. Brad and his core group sat with their arms crossed, and Mr. Peterson looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. But more than half the class applauded. As students filed out, many stopped to talk to Ayanna. They wanted to know more, they wanted to understand, they wanted to learn what they'd never been taught. Maria grabbed her arm. "That was incredible. You said what I've been too scared to say for years." James nodded. "We should start a club. Traditional Knowledge Alliance or something. Share what our families know." Yana felt something she hadn't experienced in school before. Pride. Not the kind that comes from getting an A or winning an award, but the deep, soul-filling pride of standing up for her truth. Chapter 10. The road back, but victory came with a price. The next day, Ayanna found her locker vandalized. "Go back to the reservation" was spray-painted across it. Her textbooks were soaked with what smelled like beer. A crude drawing of a drunk Indian was taped to her locker door. Brad and his friends snickered as she discovered the damage. "Aw, did someone hurt the little Indian's feelings?" Brad mocked. "Maybe you should smoke some peace pipe about it." Yana's hands shook as she cleaned out her locker, but not from fear. From rage. The same rage her ancestors must have felt watching their homes burn. The same rage generations of her people had been forced to swallow. "You know what the funny thing is, Brad?" she said, not turning around. "You think you're insulting me, but you're just proving my point. You can't argue with facts, so you resort to vandalism. You can't defend your position, so you attack mine. That's not strength, that's weakness." She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "And for the record, my ancestors didn't smoke peace pipes. The sacred pipe was for prayer and ceremony. But you wouldn't know that because you're too stupid to learn about the people whose land you're living on." The word hung in the air. Stupid. She'd thrown it back at him, and it clearly stung. "What did you call me?" Brad stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Stupid," Yana repeated clearly. "You're stupid, Brad, not because of your race or your culture, but because you choose ignorance. You choose hate. You choose to mock what you don't understand instead of trying to learn. That's the definition of stupidity." A crowd had gathered. Teachers were approaching. But Ayanna wasn't done. "You want to know the difference between your ancestors and mine?" She continued. "Mine built civilizations that lasted thousands of years in harmony with the earth. Yours showed up 500 years ago and nearly destroyed it all in the name of progress. So who's really the savage here?" Chapter 11. Resurrection. Principal Warner's office had never felt smaller. Yana sat between her mother and grandmother while Brad sat with his parents on the other side. Mr. Peterson was there too, along with the vice principal and a representative from the school board. "This is unacceptable," Brad's father was saying. He was a big man in an expensive suit, used to getting his way. "This girl attacked my son, called him stupid, made racist remarks about white people. She should be expelled." "Your son vandalized my daughter's locker," Ayana's mother said quietly. "He's been harassing her for years. And now he's upset because she finally stood up for herself." "There's no proof Brad did anything," his mother interjected. "But there are witnesses to her verbal assault." Principal Warner looked deeply uncomfortable. "Perhaps we can resolve this without any drastic measures. Ms. Blackwater, if you apologize to Brad." "No," Yana said firmly. "I won't apologize for telling the truth. I won't apologize for defending my culture. And I won't apologize for calling out ignorance when I see it." Her grandmother, who had been silent until now, slowly stood up. Despite her age, there was something commanding about her presence. "Principal Warner," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years, "my granddaughter presented documented facts in an academic setting. She was met with mockery and vandalism, and now you want her to apologize." She walked to the window, looking out at the flagpole. "You fly that flag every day. Land of the free, you say, justice for all. But where's the justice when our children are mocked for their heritage? Where's the freedom when speaking our truth is called assault? She turned back to face them. I've lived through the boarding schools where they beat us for speaking Cherokee. I've lived through the times when our ceremonies were illegal. I thought those days were over, but here we are in 2024 and you're still trying to silence us. The school board representative shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Blackwater, surely you understand that we have to maintain order. Order. Alyssa's voice was sharp. Is that what you call it when Cherokee children are told their culture is mythology, when our contributions are erased from history, when our knowledge is stolen but we're called stupid for having it? She looked directly at Brad's parents. Your son has been raised to believe he's superior because of his skin color. That's not his fault, it's yours. But it becomes his fault when he chooses to continue that ignorance. My granddaughter gave him the opportunity to learn. He chose vandalism instead. How dare you? Brad's father started, but Alyssa cut him off. I dare because I've earned the right. I've survived every attempt to erase us. I've kept our language alive when speaking it was illegal. I've preserved our medicine when practicing it could get us jailed. I've raised my children and grandchildren to be proud of who they are despite people like you telling them they should be ashamed. So yes, I dare. The room fell silent. Finally, the school board representative spoke. Perhaps we need to look at this more broadly. Ms. Blackwater's presentation raised some valid points about our curriculum. Maybe it's time we incorporated more diverse perspectives into our teaching. Mr. Peterson looked like he wanted to object, but the representative continued. And Mr. Thompson, vandalism is a serious offense. Even without direct proof, the timing is suspicious. I think both students should receive counseling on cultural sensitivity. My son doesn't need, Brad's father began. Actually, the representative said firmly, I think he does, as do many of our students apparently. Ms. Blackwater has highlighted some serious gaps in our education system. Instead of punishing her for it, perhaps we should thank her. Chapter 12. Return with the elixir. The weeks that followed were transformative. The school board mandated cultural competency training for all teachers. A new course on Indigenous history and contemporary issues was added to the curriculum. The Traditional Knowledge Alliance that James had suggested became an official school club with surprising membership. But the biggest change was in Ayanna herself. She walked the halls with her head high now, no longer trying to shrink into invisibility. When someone made an ignorant comment, she addressed it calmly but firmly. When teachers glossed over Indigenous contributions, she raised her hand and filled in the gaps. Not everyone changed. Brad and his core group still muttered insults, but they'd lost their power. Too many students had heard Ayanna's presentation. Too many had started questioning what they'd been taught. The tide had turned. One day, Tyler Morrison approached her after class. Hey, Ayanna, I owe you an apology. I laughed at those jokes. I didn't think they were a big deal. But after your presentation, I went home and asked my dad about it. He told me about all the indigenous knowledge that modern medicine uses. I had no idea. Thank you, Ayanna said simply. That means a lot. I was wondering, Tyler continued nervously, could you maybe teach me more about Cherokee culture and medicine? I'm thinking about going pre-med, and I'd like to understand traditional healing too. Ayanna smiled. I'd be happy to, but fair warning, my grandmother will probably put you to work in her garden. The Traditional Knowledge Alliance grew. Students from various backgrounds shared their family traditions. Maria taught about curanderismo. James demonstrated traditional Chinese medicine principles. Ashley researched her great-grandmother's Appalachian folk remedies and found surprising connections to Cherokee practices. Even some teachers joined. Ms. Rodriguez from the Spanish department shared how her family's traditional healing had been suppressed. Mr. Chen from mathematics talked about the advanced astronomical calculations of ancient civilizations. Slowly, the narrative of primitive versus advanced began to crumble. Epilogue. The truth that heals. 6 months later, Ayanna stood before a packed auditorium. The school had invited her to speak at the annual diversity assembly. In the audience, she could see her mother and grandmother, their faces shining with pride. She saw her allies Maria, James, Ashley, and dozens of others who had found their voices. She even saw Brad sitting in the back, his expression unreadable. "Why did you call me stupid?" she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "That's the question I asked 6 months ago. Today, I have the answer. You called me stupid because it was easier than admitting you were ignorant. You called me stupid because it was safer than questioning what you'd been taught. You called me stupid because if I was smart, if my people's knowledge was valid, then everything you believed about superiority and progress might be wrong." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But here's what I learned. Truth doesn't care about your comfort. Wisdom doesn't need your validation. And knowledge, real knowledge, can't be killed by mockery or violence or even law. It survives. It endures. It waits for the moment when someone is brave enough to speak it." She looked directly at the freshmen in the front rows. "Some of you will be called stupid for who you are, where you come from, what you believe. When that happens, remember this. The people who call you stupid are usually afraid of what you know. They're afraid that your truth will reveal their lies. They're afraid that your strength will expose their weakness. So speak your truth anyway. Share your knowledge anyway. Stand proud anyway. Because the moment you let them silence you is the moment they win, and we've been losing for too long." She touched the seed pouch in her pocket one more time. "My great-great-grandmother carried seeds on the Trail of Tears. Seeds of plants that could heal, that could nourish, that could sustain life. She knew that as long as those seeds survived, our people would survive. Your truth, your culture, your knowledge, these are your seeds. Plant them, tend them, and watch them grow into something that no amount of ignorance can destroy." The applause was thunderous. Students stood, teachers stood, even some parents stood. In the back, Ayanna noticed Brad remained seated, but he was no longer smirking. He looked thoughtful, maybe even a little ashamed. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. After the assembly, people crowded around Ayanna. A freshman girl with tears in her eyes grabbed her hand. "My family is Lakota," she whispered. "I've been too scared to tell anyone, but after hearing you, I'm not scared anymore." An elderly man approached with his grandson. "I'm Cherokee too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Left the reservation young, tried to pass for Mexican, thought it would be easier. Spent 60 years denying who I was. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to come home." As the crowd finally thinned, Ayanna found herself face to face with Mr. Peterson. He looked older, somehow tired. "Ms. Blackwater," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I've been teaching for 20 years and I never once questioned the assumptions in my curriculum. That was wrong of me." "We all have blind spots," Ayanna said. "The question is what we do when someone points them out." He nodded slowly. "I've been reading about traditional Cherokee medicine. It's quite remarkable. I was wondering if your grandmother might be willing to guest lecture in my class." Ayanna smiled. "I think she'd love that. Fair warning, though, she'll probably assign homework." As she walked home that evening, Ayanna reflected on the journey. She'd started as the quiet girl, invisible and dismissed. She'd faced the challenge, found her voice, and discovered that speaking truth, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, was the most powerful medicine of all. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the call of a hawk. Her grandmother would say it was a good sign, a blessing from the ancestors, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. "Why did you call me stupid?" she whispered to the wind. "Because you didn't know any better, but now you do, and that changes everything." She thought of all the quiet kids still sitting in classrooms, swallowing poison, shrinking themselves to fit into boxes too small for their spirits. Her fight wasn't over. It had just begun, but she was ready now. She had found her voice, claimed her power, and learned the most important lesson of all. The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. As she reached her grandmother's house, she could smell sage burning, welcoming her home. Through the window, she saw Elise working on her newest project, a garden at the school where students could learn about medicinal plants. Tyler Morrison was there, diligently taking notes while Elise explained the properties of purple coneflower. Echinacea, Gianna could hear her grandmother saying. Your people call it a discovery of modern science. We've known about it for 1,000 years, but see, we can learn from each other. That's how we heal the world, one plant, one student, one truth at a time. Iana smiled and went inside. Tomorrow she would continue the work. Tomorrow she would speak more truth. Tomorrow she would plant more seeds. But tonight she would sit with her grandmother, drink tea made from plants their ancestors knew, and celebrate the small victory of a girl who refused to be silenced. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be called stupid. Sometimes, the greatest courage is speaking your truth in a world that doesn't want to hear it. And sometimes the most powerful medicine is remembering who you are. The Cherokee girl who asked, "Why did you call me stupid?" had found her answer. More importantly, she had found herself. And in finding herself, she had shown others the way home. The truth had hurt, but the truth had also healed. And that, as her grandmother would say, was the most ancient medicine of all.